Well, good evening and welcome to Wide Awake News. I'm Gary Hendershot, and it's Monday, August 5th already. The year just seems to keep going faster and faster. The pace seems to be picking up. But I tell you, we got a lot of news to cover tonight, so strap yourselves in, get that seatbelt around you. Make sure you've got your favorite adult beverage and snacks ready, because here we go. You know, we've had this so-called war on terror now, I guess since 2001 or thereabouts. Before that, we had some relatively benign wars like a war on poverty and a war on drugs, and we've had, war on indescript, unintelligible enemies who you can't really put a handle on, that don't really have a government, don't really have a nation. We've had that kind of war going on, I guess, since the Johnson administration. That was back in the 60s. And they seem to have become more and more pervasive and more invasive into our lives. Well, now this war on terror has got everybody, checking under the bed every night looking for Al-Qaeda, and some guy with a beard and a turban's going to be, hiding in the bathtub, or, you're going to be taking a shower and he's going to sneak up and throw a Molotov cocktail at you while you're in the shower or something. He's out there, and you need the government minding everything to make sure you're safe and secure. Or so they'd like you to believe. Now, when you justify the implementation of what can only be described as a police state as a means of controlling this unknown, unseen, unnamed enemy that's out there,
you can justify all kinds of weird, contorted things. How about all this, stuff with the NSA? That's been big in the news of late, and frankly, from my point of view right now, it's something of a distraction from Benghazi. But I'm going to save the Benghazi story until next week because, frankly, I got a lot on my plate, and the Benghazi story is still developing. So tonight, we're going to try to put some closure on this NSA thing. A fellow named Snowden came out and flat told us basically what we already knew. The government's snooping on everything. They learned how to do it when they were kicking Iraq's butt. They're trying to figure out, how they were going to get intelligence in Iraq. They didn't have a whole bunch of homeboys that were on their side, so they figured, okay, well, I know what we'll do. We will just intercept every piece of communication that these guys do. We will read every email. We'll listen to every phone call. We will record everything. And using our advanced data mining techniques, we will find what we're looking for. Or invent it. Well, now that technology has moved to the homeland and is incorporated into your homeland security mechanism. Don't you feel safe and secure knowing that that email you sent to Grandma telling her you'd bring her pressure cooker back because that you borrowed a couple weeks ago? Aren't you comfy knowing that the NSA read that email and probably flagged you as a potential terrorist? Doesn't that make you feel good? Knowing that your NSA is out there keeping you safe and secure. Well, a major report has come out, and for anybody who's interested, there are show notes for August 5th located at smartscarecrow.com. Wander over to the website, check out the show notes tonight. You'll find a link to this article. Is NSA
secretly feeding spy intel to police for petty crimes. Now, they justified this telling us that this was for national security, that we had to keep Al Qaeda under control. This was critical to the national defense and to keep you safe. Now we come to find out that intel derived from snooping by the NSA might be why you got pulled over for that broken taillight, and while they were snooping around, happened to find that hunk of a joint in your ashtray or whatever. Yeah, think about that. So data that's being collected in the name of national security is commonly shared with local law enforcement to enforce just routine, run-of-the-mill, average everyday violations? Yeah, so it appears. Though NSA officials and their backers have repeatedly said that the spy programs are designed to keep America safe from international terrorism, the new revelations show that domestic law enforcement is likely being supplied with data from these same operations. A secretive U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration unit called Special Operations Division, or SOD, is funneling information from intelligence intercepts, wiretaps, informants, and a massive database of telephone records to authorities across the nation to help them launch criminal investigation of just average Americans. Maybe instead of looking for Osama under your bed, you ought to be looking for a NSA wiretap. Defense attorneys who spoke to Reuters called the program outrageous, indefensible, and blatantly unconstitutional. Duh! You can't game the system, said one former federal prosecutor. You can't create this subterfuge. These are drug crimes, not national security cases. If you don't draw the line here, where do you draw it? Good question. Have you asked yourself that question? What do you think? As always, consider. Make up your own damn mind. Needless to say, this stuff's been flying around quite a bit. There's another article that's out of the Daily Mail. A secret U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration unit that parcels out sophisticated intelligence to other law enforcement agencies is also using task forces set up to prevent terrorism in order to help police departments build minor local drug cases, sources have confirmed to the Mail Online. The Joint Terrorism Task Forces are law enforcement coalitions administered by the FBI that generally include representatives from up to 40 different federal agencies, plus state and local police departments near each task force's center of operations. Now, of course, nobody wants to make it easy for terrorists to take advantage of our easygoing ways. At the same time, snooping in the name of national security really should not be used as probable cause for simple local statutory violations. Stay tuned. We'll be back right after these important commercial announcements. All righty, so it's become clear that in the name of national security, the NSA is sharing information derived from its clandestine operations with local law enforcement. Now, how does this work? Well, it's not like they're taking the local sheriff or the local cop into their full confidence. Basically, they get a call in the middle of the night from an undisclosed federal informant or whatever, and they're basically they get a little whisper in the ear saying you're directed to find a vehicle code violation to stop the car. Well, of course, there's so many of those. They basically they can pull you over and just ask for your driver's license and insurance information and say you didn't have your seatbelt on. I mean, there's so many stupid regulations on the books that can justify a traffic stop. And the officers or the agencies are pretty much walled off about any, source of this information. But, they've been whispered in the ear that, we have a wire and we know there's dope or dope money in the car. Yeah. So, they find some reason to search the automobile. Next thing you know, from out these guys
Came from, all of a sudden they have targeted you for a random stop, and you're heading off down to the pokey because you had, the stub of a doobie in your ashtray. Yeah. And that's how that's working. Well, part of the reason that such things are wrapped around this national security issue is that, quite frankly, when it comes to drugs and drug money, the government just flat does not want your competition. Here's an interesting article comes out of Costa Rica. A curious cargo airlift operation recently took place at the Daniel Quiros, I probably said the name wrong, International Airport in the northern province of Costa Rica. According to a news report, nearly 24 tons of cocaine were loaded onto a United States Air Force transport aircraft. The destination of the controversial payload, Miami, a city that once held the infamous title of cocaine capital of the world. Now, to be fair, there's a sidebar to this, okay? Folks in Costa Rica had managed to interdict this cocaine on its way up the cocaine pipeline into the United States. And this was captured cocaine that was turned over to the United States ostensibly for the purpose of having it destroyed, because Costa Rica just does not have a facility locally where they can get rid of that much coke. Now, other reports have indicated that all of a sudden cocaine in Miami is plentiful and very reasonably priced. So, who knows what to think. In this item, it pays to read Dark Alliance from a journalist by the name of Gary Webb. The CIA has been known to dabble in drug dealing, basically to raise money for so many of their ridiculous black projects. And if you're out there making a buck moving dope, you are in direct competition with the biggest mafia on the face of the planet, and they will send Louis the Leg Breaker by to eliminate you as a competitor. Are we clear on that issue? Student loans. Kind of saw it coming when George Bush II had it made illegal to declare bankruptcy on a student loan. They were going to, the government was going to back these student loans, and it was decided that they were going to be taken off the table. So if you had to go bankruptcy, you cannot discharge your student loans even in a bankruptcy. And there are people out there, a lot of them, that owe as much on student loans as many people owe on their mortgage. As a matter of fact, right now, the value of all the student loans currently outstanding is roughly $1.2
trillion. All but about 15% of that amount is backed by the Fed government. Higher education still provides a clear financial edge, with unemployment rate among college graduates at about half that of those with just high school diplomas. However, when you add the student loans into the mix, the actual financial advantage of obtaining a college degree has been devalued substantially. Frankly, if you've got a kid of college age that's getting ready to go off to university, you might want to talk to him about going to plumbing school or heating and air conditioning school, or learn how to be an electrician, or how to fix washing machines, or maybe how to fix automobiles, because there seems to be a definite lack of people who know how to properly repair an automobile in the United States these days. Bottom line is, there's a new trend because employment is so scarce. Nearly a third of college graduates in their early 20s to early 30s are living home with mom and dad because they cannot start their path on the American dream while the economy is in such dismal condition. And yes, student loans now account for the highest default rate of any consumer lending. We'll be back with more Wide Awake News after these commercial announcements. Stand by. I've noticed something of a trend with hot items in the news. Last week there was a little blurb about Fukushima, but it was kind of esoteric and kind of removed from immediacy. It's like, this has been going on and that's been going on, and we got this kind of radioactive contamination and that kind of radioactive contamination. Oh, poor pitiful us. This week Fukushima's back in the news, and this week it's serious. Okay, now pay attention to the way news is reported. What you will see this buildup where, there's this little teaser, and there's this slightly worse thing, and then they hit you with the real bombshell. Well, this week we got a real bombshell out of Fukushima. Highly radioactive water seeping into the ocean from Japan's crippled Fukushima nuclear plant is creating an emergency that the operator is struggling to contain. This contaminated groundwater has breached an underground barrier, is rising towards the surface, and is exceeding legal limits of radioactive discharge. Now keep in mind, these are the new limits, the ones that they sent through the stratosphere after this thing happened. They used to have fairly sane limits, and then after Fukushima, everybody said, we got this problem, radioactivity from Fukushima is really off the scale. What are we going to do? I know. We'll just raise the legal limit. No problem solved. Hey, everybody, it's safe, safe to go back in the water. No problem. TEPCO, and a lot of people point the finger at TEPCO. Keep in mind, TEPCO was the operator of this nuclear power plant. They didn't design it. They didn't build it. And technically, they didn't own it. They're just the power company. They operated it for the purpose of producing power that they then resold. The real owners of this plant is the United States Department of Defense, General Electric, and the government of Japan. But TEPCO's sense of crisis is weak. This is why you just can't leave it up to TEPCO. See, they're going to make TEPCO the fall guy because, it's easy. They're a corporate entity. They'll hound them out of business, bury them under the bury them. They'll go bankrupt or whatever. New company will be formed to buy the electricity from the power plants and resell it to the Japanese people. No problem. Problem solved, right? That naughty TEPCO, they got what they deserved. They contaminated the entire northern hemisphere, and we put them out of business because of it. See? We're good. We're good. While the real culprits are laughing up their sleeves. This breach of this water means that radioactive contaminated water that has been directly in contact with what's left of the core of the melted down reactors is quite literally just going to be flushed into the ocean with no treatment, no attempts at remediation. Not like there's really that much they could do anyway. But what it means is that a huge volume of glow-in-the-dark water with every kind of nasty radioactive particulate matter you can think of in it is going to be flushing out into the ocean currents and will eventually wind up off the coast of Alaska and the western United States. And don't think it won't come inland, because a lot of it's carried in the air as well. So, if you think this is a Japanese problem, think again. The hemisphere
is contaminated with radioactivity because of this disaster. And the southern hemisphere is starting to see it as well. Air National Guard unit authorized to fly MQ-9 Reaper drone New York region. You live anywhere near Syracuse, New York? Turns out they've been flying them around there for the last 3 years, but now the FAA has given them, full-fledged permission. So instead of doing their training exercises in F-16 fighters, they're going to be flying Reaper drones. So all you folks around the Syracuse, New York area that live near what is this? Air National Guard 174th Attack Wing. There's a fort of 70 miles north of Syracuse. Get your binoculars out and do some drone spotting. If New York gets on board with this bounty on drones, might even be an opportunity to make some money, and in hard times might be just what the doctor ordered. Who knows? This next topic is going to be a tough one, because it's going to require a bit of build-up, but it's I think worth the effort. It's one of these thought-provoking articles that I hope gets people thinking, perhaps gets them to go over to smartscarecrow.com, look for the show notes for August 5th, 2013, and take a look in the show notes for the link to an article that's entitled, "Welcome to Post-Constitution America. What if your country begins to change and no one notices?" It's an editorial piece, and you can read it, examine it on your own, see what you think. As always, consider the source, consider the information presented, make up your own damn mind. But I'm going to go ahead and cover some sections of this article that I think are relevant and pertinent to tonight's discussion. Just to give you a little taste, just to give you a little tease, hopefully get you interested enough to put on the reading glasses and read the entire article.
This is how it starts. On July 30th, 1778, the Continental Congress created the first whistleblower protection law. Kind of relevant to today's situation, don't you think? Making the statement that it is the duty of all persons in the service of the United States to give the earliest information to Congress or other proper authority of any misconduct, frauds, misdemeanors committed by any officers or persons in the service of these states. Sounds like a sane and rational thing. Basically, if you're employed by the government, it is your duty to rat out anybody who's picking up a paycheck from the government who might do something that is contrary to the principal law of the land, which in those days was still recognized as being the Constitution of the United States. 235 years later, on July 20th, 2013, Bradley Manning was found guilty on 20 of the 22 charges for which he was prosecuted, specifically for espionage and for videos of war atrocities he released, but not for aiding the enemy, because I guarantee you, the enemy already knew we were guilty of what anybody with a sane, rational mind would consider war crimes. Our government, our military, operating in our name, was doing dirt. And the only ones who didn't know about it were the people of the United States who these actions were being taken on behalf of. I'm talking about you. You were the one who wasn't supposed to know. The enemy already knew. We'll be back to discuss this further right after these commercial announcements. All right, so the only charge that the prosecution was not able to make stick against Manning was aiding the enemy. Now stop and think about that for a minute, because, if they had come out and admitted that his releasing of videos of war atrocities and all the other nonsense that was in his package he gave to WikiLeaks, they would have flat had to admit that the enemy that he was aiding was the American people. Because the enemy over there that we were doing what was called a double tap on. You know what a double tap is? This is cute. This is really cute. What they do is they send one of these attack helicopters or one of these warthogs in to blow something up. And then when the rescue workers arrive, the first responders, the medics and the ambulances, they come back and they blow them up too. It's called a double tap, and it was considered great fun during our Iraqi and Afghan incursions. Where most nations in the world would consider that to be a heinous war crime, the United States military practiced it with impunity. That was one of the messages that Bradley Manning brought to the American conscience. All of a sudden, we had to look in the mirror and admit the kind of horrible activities. I mean, it's one thing to go to war. I mean, yeah, I understand. Believe me, I understand that, nations being what they are and people being what they are, every once in a while, the two biggest bullies on the block are going to go head to head. They're going to kick, one of them's going to kick the other one's butt, okay? That is the nature of human interaction. There are going to be wars. And wars are never clean. They're never pretty. Both sides do things that, in hindsight, they kind of wish they hadn't involved themselves with. But to engage in some of the practices that our military was engaged in, it's embarrassing. It's embarrassing to me as an American that such things were done in my name. Take, for example, the use of depleted uranium weapons. Now, both the Allies and the Germans had depleted uranium weapons in World War II. This is not a new space-age technology. This is old hat. It's been around since World War II. Neither side chose to use them because they understood that the contamination left behind by such weapons would not just affect today's antagonists, but it would affect the children, the grandchildren, the great-grandchildren. It would be a multi-generational war. I mean, one thing about most of the wars during the 20th century is, there was a beginning, there was a middle, and there was an end. While the United States has declared victory in Iraq, and we've declared victory in Afghanistan, the legacy of those wars will be felt by the peoples of those nations for generations to come. Is that what modern warfare is all about? Is that the kind of treatment that we as Americans can expect from an adversary that invades our homeland? If at some point the Russians or the Chinese decide they've got no other choice, they got to come over here and kick our butts, is that what we have invited for ourselves by our actions? I have people all the time say, I didn't authorize that. What do you mean my actions? I didn't do that. I wouldn't do so. Well, I know. And you talk to the average American, we wouldn't do so. I mean, most Americans are honorable people. You force us into a corner and we got to come out fighting, we're going to come out fighting hard. But, there's kind of a code of honor that we like to live by. And we like to think that the government that's operating in our name is also operating with a similar code of honor. Are they? Thanks to Edward Snowden, another whistleblower, we now know that the collect it all technique employed by the NSA in Iraq would soon be used to collect American metadata of all sorts and be mined for all purposes. The FBI has brought two other NSA wartime tools home. The Bureau now uses a device called Stingray to recreate those battlefield fake cell phone towers and track people in the U.S. If you've got a phone with that GPS gizmo built into it that, tells you where you are or where the nearest Starbucks is or, where you can get a pizza when you're hungry, if they want to know, they can find out exactly where you are. If you are a person of interest and you carry a phone that has that sort of technology built into it, the interesting thing is you can't even turn it off by pulling the battery out. Of course, a lot of the phones nowadays, you can't even take the battery out of them if you want to. Verizon, for instance, admits hacking its own cellular modems. These are the gizmos you put in your laptop, or maybe you bought an iPad that has a Verizon cellular phone connection in it. Verizon admits to having hacked those connections on behalf of intelligence gathering. The FBI is also following NSA's lead, implanting spyware and other hacker software developed for our war zones secretly and remotely in American computers and cell phones. The Bureau can then remotely turn on phones, laptops, microphones, even webcams to monitor citizens to make sure Osama's not hiding under your bed. Doesn't that make you feel safe and secure? Now, the argument of government is that fellows like this guy, Bradley Manning, fellows like Snowden, are traitors. They have betrayed the United States. They've given, secret methods that we use to gather intelligence to our enemies. The enemies they're speaking of is you and me, because we're the only ones who didn't know about it in the first place. Has that gotten through to you yet? You are the enemy combatant that the United States intelligence services is scared of. They want to know every keystroke you type on your computer. They want to know every place you go. They want to be able to find you on a moment's notice if, for any reason, you become a person of interest. Rules of evidence. Rules of evidence. Rules of evidence reaching back to early English common law have been turned upside down. In Manning's case, he was convicted of espionage, even though the prosecution did not have to prove his intent to help another government or that harm was caused. Like I said, the enemy in Iraq and Afghanistan, believe me, they knew. Okay? They had firsthand experience. They knew. The only one that didn't know was you and me. In addition, the government was allowed to label Manning a traitor and an anarchist in open court. Though he was on trial for neither treason nor anarchy. His army supervisor in the U.S. and Iraq was allowed to testify against him despite having made biased and homophobic statements about him, portraying Manning as a sad, sexually confused, attention-seeking young man who was mesmerized by this fellow Julian Assange, who started WikiLeaks. Finally, the same judge who essentially harassed the press throughout Manning's trial issued a 24-hour advanced notice of her verdict to ensure maximum coverage. Justice in the United States? Protecting whistleblowers? Like Carlin said, it's called the American dream because you got to be asleep to believe it. Thanks for listening. Stay tuned. Jeff Rentz will be along right after these commercials, and I'll see you next Monday. Good night, all.